Congressman Roy, great to see you. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you, Sean.
Okay, just bottom line it. Where does the SAVE Act stand?
Yeah, great question. First of all, so all your viewers aren't confused, because it can get confusing, I introduced the SAVE Act 2 years ago, along with my friend Mike Lee in the Senate, which focused on citizenship, right? And cleaning up voter rolls and ensuring that we had a registration process that guaranteed only citizens could register to vote. Great bill that we were trying to move in 2024 because we were concerned with the election. Moved it through the House. Chuck Schumer, the Democrats, blocked it in the Senate. Fast forward to this year, we reintroduced the SAVE Act, but we had not included voter ID because that was a separate provision. So we reintroduced the SAVE Act, and everybody's been talking about it. Great bill again. We support it, and great support in the Senate. We now have 50 co-sponsors for the SAVE Act in the Senate. But in consultation with the president and our friends in the House and the Senate, we added in, Mike and I did, along with Cleta Mitchell. You probably know Cleta, a great friend who's a brilliant lawyer on election law. And we added in a federal voter ID provision, and that is now the Save America Act. So that bill we introduced last week, and I believe that's the bill that's going to now gain momentum. We might as well do them both together. We might only get one bite at this apple. So I hope the House will now move the Save America Act through and get that to the Senate. And then we're just going to have to put pressure on the Senate to go ahead and do what they need to do, which is use a talking filibuster to break the back of the Democrats who want to continue to block this common sense legislation that polls at 80% plus.
All right, so let's just start with what is a talking filibuster, and why is that different than just telling John Thune put it on the normal calendar?
Yeah, and that's a great question, right? Because no doubt Majority Leader Thune wants to get a vote on it. I believe that 100%. If we got a vote on it, we'd get 51 or 2 or 3 votes, but it would die because it doesn't get to 60, which is the threshold that we put in place in the Senate to say if you get 60, you can shut everything down and you can move it through, right? You can stop any of the slowing down process of the debates. For the viewers out there, right, think Mr. Smith goes to Washington, right? A senator goes to the floor, they can slow things down. But that's what you think, that you're talking, you're filibustering, you're on the floor. I worked for Senator Cruz. Remember, he gave a long speech trying to slow things down. But we have this sort of default in this town that you have to get to 60 to shut it down. That's not true. The Senate rules have always allowed that if 51 members of the Senate are on the floor of the Senate, technically 50 plus the tie break with J.D. Vance, are on the floor of the Senate and demanding that they want a vote, then they can get a vote unless somebody's talking. So the point here is to have a talking filibuster. Make the Democrats go to the floor of the Senate, make them talk, make them explain to the American people why they do not want voter identification and only citizens voting. We think that's a winning issue, so force the fight onto the floor of the Senate.
So I played this clip right before you came on, and Senator Thune was asked about this yesterday. My interpretation of this was it was sort of the mealy mouth Senate version of "I'd love to date you, but I can't. I've got to." I mean, it was sort of like we've got these other priorities like permitting reform, and the party planning committee has to meet on Friday to plan Shelley Moore Capito's birthday. No offense to Shelley, but I mean, it just sounded to me like that his heart wasn't in it. You seem to think that his heart is in it.
Well, I think that the senator is feeling the pressure, and that he may find his heart to want to move this procedure that we're talking about to force a talking filibuster. Now, look, you are correct. The default position of the Senate is the nursing home mentality. They don't want to have to vote. They want to leave the Senate in what we call quorum calls. You've seen that on C-SPAN, right? They just sit there doing nothing till somebody goes down and gives a speech. Then they sit there doing nothing till they have a vote after they've all had their lunches and they've gone out and met with donors. And then they have a vote on something like permitting reform because some business interests have said that's the most important thing. The American people are screaming that the most important thing is that we have our country, that we're sovereign, that citizens vote, that we have voter ID, that we know that American citizens are determining the future of our country. I think the majority leader is feeling that pressure. I think he would love to see it pass, but the default position in the Senate is, well, we can't do that. And look, he'll make arguments that are like, well, we're going to lose time on the floor. We're not going to be able to move nominations. We're not going to be able to move other bills. And I'm going to say, look, Majority Leader Thune, there's no point in moving these things if we lose our country because illegal aliens and non-citizens and people that shouldn't be voting are voting.
Well, also, like, I hate to say this, like the the bills, the legislation that he listed off, I'm sure is very important. I don't mean to minimize it at all. I'm sure permitting reform is very important for the regulatory agenda. And I mean that in all sincerity. I think that President Trump's done a great job in that.
We agree.
But to your point, like, I was a little dismayed with some of the comments about the Hyde Amendment, right? Pro-life stuff, very important to our cause. Some of the comments about the Second Amendment, not so helpful. And then I'm like, wait a second, if you guys don't get the same, like, how do you motivate the base to come out in a midterm if you're like crapping on all of the key things that I want to get fired up to vote for? I want to go, yes, we made our election safer. We did something to root out fraud or prevent. I mean, like, I just don't know what we're doing heading into a midterm when we kind of come up with excuses about core issues that our side should be for.
Yeah, Sean, I couldn't have said it better. And in fact, just pick up on a couple of those things. We've been pushing back on this degradation of the Hyde Amendment. We've been fighting for all of those things. And to be clear, right? Last year in the big, beautiful bill, we were able to shut down funding to go to Planned Parenthood. We were able to get a lot of good things done. And I know you agree with that. I'm trying to remind voters, we've been holding that line and working with the administration and delivering. We've been upholding and fighting for Second Amendment rights. I am equally dismayed by the commentary by a U.S. attorney here in District of Columbia, other members of the administration that aren't acknowledging the sanctity of the Second Amendment. We're fighting and putting pressure on that in a divided, in our government of separated powers. But you are 100% right. We have got to, make the American people believe that we're fighting for them. And the Save America Act would do that. So my message to the Majority Leader Thune is, look, I know I can't have everything I want. Look, we've been working to compromise. The big, beautiful bill wasn't everything I wanted. There are other bills that we're working on that way. By the way, the appropriations bill that we just moved through, not everything I wanted, but we were working to figure out how to help the president and deliver for the country. The Majority Leader needs to deliver on this. Our country depends on it. The American people will show up and vote for us if we lead. And by the way, we can be effective in driving through and getting government funding and all this stuff, even where we disagree, but you got to stand up and fight for the things they send us here to change. This is one of them.
All right, guys, if you're looking for that amazing snack, then you got to do what I do right now. I've gotten into Masa Chips, all natural, 3 ingredients. That's right. Corn, seed oil, and salt. That's it. Crunchier, tastier. These are Maha approved snacks. You are not going to regret it. My tip, get the variety pack. Go to Masa, M-A-S-A chips.com, masachips.com/Sean, S-E-A-N, for 25% off. That's masachips.com/Sean. Use code Sean for 25% off. Here's the thing that I found interesting this week. Starting what it was, Tuesday, Monday, Tuesday. If you want to get on a plane and you don't have a real ID, they're going to fine you. The government will fine you $45 for the added, hassle of proving that you are who you say you are.
Correct.
Did you hear any pushback from Democrats?
So it's funny you say that, right? Or any other front, right? Like, to get into the Democratic National Convention, do you not have to show ID? I mean, like, there are all of these places you have to have ID now to pretty much go to a baseball game. It's crazy. And look, I don't love some of those things, right? But we're talking about voting. We're talking about flying. By the way, they didn't fund TSA, right? We have 14-day extension of Homeland Security because they don't want to fund ICE and Border Patrol. But by doing that, that means in 14 days, we're not going to have funding for TSA and we're not going to have funding for FEMA. So my question is, over the next 2 weeks, when we're debating funding for TSA, are we going to say that it is okay to force every American to have a real ID in order to fly and go about the country? But we're not going to say it's important to have an ID to vote? Right? That's the debate that I think we ought to be having as we're sitting here going into this and funding Homeland Security. They want to take away ICE. They want to take away Border Patrol funding. They want to have open borders, but they want to make you have to go through all the hassles at TSA, but they don't want you to have an ID to vote.
Okay, but here's why I bring this up. At least from what I can see, the argument on the left is, gosh, Congressman Roy, do you realize these poor, stupid people don't know how to even get an ID, one of these IDs, and therefore they're going to be disadvantaged when they go to vote? We can't allow that to happen. Okay, if you buy that argument and you're a Democrat, then aren't you equally concerned that they can't go to a public event? They can't get on a plane. They can't apply for benefits. It's just, to me, the irony is there's a lack of consistency. They don't care about any of these people not being able to do any of the activities that I just described. But when it comes to one of the most fundamental things as Americans, they suddenly care about all these poor, disadvantaged people and their ability to get an ID.
So 100% agree. And I'm going to add one other layer. I'm going to go find that video that I remember was going around for a while where a guy went and did a walkabout New York City. And he was asking people about IDs. And he asked a bunch of white liberal people in New York City, in Manhattan, about ID and voter ID for voting and whether it's racist. And they all, of course, are like, oh, it's racist. It's terrible. It'll prevent people from voting. They don't have access. They can't even use computers. Then they went around Harlem and asked a whole bunch of people the same question. And they're like, and repeated what all those white liberals had said. And the folks in Harlem were like, that's crazy. Yeah.
That's racist.
It's like right around the corner. Yeah, I should have an ID. I know how to use a computer. They are so condescending, these liberals who want to nanny state everybody. They're the racists. And that's the real issue I think we can point through.
But I'm going to take this one step further. I actually think the real issue is this. There's an agenda at stake. Okay. Yeah. You may not agree with me. But I want you to answer this, but like, I have to believe sometimes that the answer is a lot more right in front of our face. They allow 4 million, 14 million, 40 million, whatever it was, to flood into this country. Then what's the thing they say? Well, you got to give them a license. You got to give them a license because, gosh, we want to know who they are. We want them to be able to drive or whatever. Okay. And then they say, well, you can't ask them for an ID. If they vote, they create a perfect mousetrap. And suddenly when we go, well, it's got to be a real ID and it's compliant, all this, that's where I think that the Dems and the liberals have created this perfect trap. They allow people to get flooded into the country. Yeah. Then they basically say, well, we can't have ICE deport them because ICE is bad and evil and they've got rights. Then we can't allow people to have an ID when they vote because, but I actually just think that this is like, we need to expose that there's a deeper agenda at stake, which is these guys really want their votes. This is what they're doing.
100%. We completely agree. And in fact, they give up the game when they say they don't want ICE to be anywhere near voting facilities. It's like, well, why are you concerned about that if nobody's voting who's illegal, right? That shouldn't be an issue. So this is ridiculous. That's all set up. By the way, the Minneapolis fraud is the tip of the iceberg. If they can commit that kind of fraud at childcare facilities, what do you think they're doing with voting? What do you think they're doing in terms of trying to make sure they've got votes where it's in the census, it's counted so they can have more representation? Is all intentional. Your point is well taken. And in fact, yesterday, in a different issue but related, we were talking about the Islamification of America. That's all about the same stuff. It's all about, transforming our country and bringing people in that are totally undermining Western civilization and the rule of law. It's all related. It's all funded by the same people, all of this vast array of networks of NGOs. And we've got to keep working to stop it. And I support the administration in doing that.
I want to get to your your presser yesterday on sure. Sort of the Muslim Brotherhood, because I was blown away when you said something to the effect of Dallas is ground zero. I was like, so I want to just put a pin in that for a second and wrap this up on the SAVE Act. Are there Republicans in the House and Senate who say to you, Congressman Roy, like, I'll put my name on that. Like, are they weasels on this? Is there actually support? I mean, we mentioned what's going on in the Senate. Like, I feel like our side wants to do a lot of talking points, but when Chip Roy walks to them and says, are you going to vote yes? They go, well, I got an issue with the with low income people. Or like, do we have solid Republican support first and foremost?
Well, we know for sure that we do in the SAVE Act because we've passed it, I think, unanimously in the House both times among Republicans. And we've even had a few Democrats vote for it. In the Senate, obviously, there's 50, I think, people who are signed up to the SAVE Act, but there's 3 who are not: McConnell, Murkowski, and Collins. Now, McConnell is the one who's publicly said, something about federalism and we shouldn't interfere with states. And I think that's old thinking and he's wrong. There's clear federal nexus here. We have the right to control elections for electing Congress. In addition, we have oversight over immigration and how identification impacts voting. So I don't see that as a problem. But McConnell's a no, and then Murkowski and Collins have been silent. We have 50 people supporting SAVE. On the federal voter ID, we haven't fully tested it yet. There's overwhelming support. Is it unanimous? Don't know yet. I suspect it is. I suspect we'll have unanimous support in the House, give or take a couple of votes that we got to see. In the Senate, we'll see. And, but again, the issue there is getting Thune to press this through so we can break the back of the 60 vote, fake filibuster.
When the president says he wants to nationalize elections, do you think he's just talking about the SAVE Act, or do you think that he actually wants to have the federal government take over like Texas's elections?
Yeah, my read of that was that what he's talking about is his way of describing what we're trying to do, which is say that for federal elections, voter ID should apply, right? In other words, we're not saying that we're putting a federal mandate that we have to have voter ID for local elections in Texas or impacting their ability to handle their local elections how they see fit. We're saying that we have a nexus to have a federal voter ID and a federal registration requirement if you're voting in federal elections that impact other states, right? There's by definition under the Constitution, we have that authority. I think that's what the president meant, but I haven't asked it, but that was my
So
interpretation.
so I'm with you on all of this, like 100%. Like I don't understand that a federal election requiring that Congress has the constitutional authority over to say that you have to be a U.S. citizen and prove it, to me is a no-brainer. Democrats that I talk to say, oh, if you guys go down that path, then we will then, when we get into power, create a day off. We'll set times and standards, and we'll decide what the place and manner of election is. We'll talk about what machines you have to use. Because if you guys go down the nationalize election path, we'll go down it too. To which my answer is, that's not even close to the same. How do you answer that?
Yeah, I don't think it's the same. And importantly, if they want to do that, they're going to do it anyway, right?
Yeah.
It's only going to be a battle of the votes. I mean, look, that's the reality. They want to go down that road. Hell, they were literally two votes away from nuking the filibuster fully. All we're talking about is a talking filibuster. And they wanted to nuke the filibuster so they could pack the court, make DC a state, and but for Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema, they would have done it. So that's coming. We should bank that in. They want to completely do all of that. They want to ban ammo, ban guns, take the guns away. They want DC to be a state. They want to pack the court. They want to make hate speech an issue. They want to be like Europe. They're going to do that if we don't right now reclaim our country. Every day that goes by that we don't, while we have the majority in the House and the Senate and Donald Trump in the White House, is a day that we're allowing them to get organized. So when they get the majority back, to go run right over our rights. And by the way, that I actually think we probably should have same day voting. I think we should actually maybe make that a holiday. I actually have a bill that I haven't introduced yet that would make Veterans Day election day, make that the same, have a holiday, have everybody vote that day, but limit early voting. Have only a few days of early voting, get rid of mail-in ballots, have old school absentee ballots, have paper ballots. I think there's other things we should do besides just Save America. But Save America is a no-brainer, voter ID and citizenship.
By the way, sign me up to the rest of that, because I'm with you. Like, get back to what we used to have an election day. I don't care. Make it the day off. I like the idea that you're proposing, right. Or move Veterans Day. I'm fine with it. As a veteran, I'll do that too.
Right.
But I think and frankly, there's nothing more civic than going out and voting. I'm fine with that. I agree with you, with the exception of like overseas ballots for military service members, right. and for people who are sick which
was the way we used to do it. Those
right.
were absentee ballots. Yes.
Yeah. And that's the goal here, right? We do recognize, again, this is all about the Dems trying to figure out new ways to do
Correct.
all this. So the last thing I want to ask you before I get to the Brotherhood comments you made yesterday is this: the media likes to portray this whole thing. Every story I see about the SAVE Act, etc., says the Republicans love to talk about fraud. It doesn't exist. I mean, yeah. I feel like that's such they love to create this narrative that's just not true.
So my argument in response to that is, number one, if it doesn't exist, then what are you worried about?
Exactly.
Number two, and by the way, they then come up with these fake arguments. Oh, you're going to prevent women from being able to vote when they change their name, or you're going to, it's racist. And that's just not true. CNN was putting polling out showing something like 75 to 80% of Black Americans and Hispanic Americans support voter ID. It's just garbage that this is somehow racist or going to interfere with the ability of women to vote. That's made up nonsense. But they're going to try to run to those tropes. But the truth is, I'd say, yes, if you think that's the case, then you shouldn't be worried about it. But there's examples across the country of replete with examples of fraud. Yeah. The number of people who we are finding on voter rolls who are not in the state, are not citizens, are registered in other states, that are not somebody who should be voting in those elections, and then matching that up to go figure out who they're voting, that's happening all across the country. And by the way, states like Arizona are prohibited by federal law from being able to check voter rolls to ensure that only citizens vote. So they do it for states, right, for their state elections, but they don't do it for federal elections because federal courts have told them they can't. That's absurd. A state should be able to match the voter rolls look and see who's a citizen and make sure those line up. And that's what we're trying to do to fix this.
100%. All right, let me get to this. I was shocked. I see your press conference yesterday, and your quote was something to the extent of Dallas is ground zero for the Muslim Brotherhood.
I am proud to be with this group of Americans, of colleagues, many of whom wore the uniform in defense of our nation and in defense of our nation against radical Islamic terrorists who wanted to destroy our country and destroy what we know about Western civilization. And now that same war is being conducted against us, but from within. And anybody who's actually paying attention to this and understands the intentions of the Muslim Brotherhood and follows and looks at the writings and what these folks are talking about, Dallas, Houston, Texas is ground zero. That's why Keith Self and I joined together to create this Sharia-Free Caucus, Sharia-Free America Caucus, because we understand that the root strength of this country is our Judeo-Christian principles and the values of Western civilization that have advanced the cause of liberty, freedom, and prosperity for people around the world. And our ancestors bled and died so that we could live in a country like this. And you can believe whatever you want, but you cannot engage in what is a political effort to Islamify the United States of America and not expect us to fight back and say no.
I was like, are you kidding? I don't know. I don't know where I thought they'd be, but not in Dallas, Texas.
Yeah, so if you talk to experts, you look at what's happening in London, what's happening in Paris, which, by the way, if you want to see what's coming to America, if we don't do the right thing, that's it. It's a preview of coming attractions. In Dallas, where you've got this epic city, the East Plano Islamic Center with 400 acres, building up an entire area that is basically Muslim-centric, where they want to have Sharia law in place and have a neighborhood effectively that is entirely Sharia-based and Islamic. And then you've got the Islamic Center in Houston. You've got an Islamic Center north of Austin. You've got one on West Campus of the University of Texas. You have 300 mosques in Texas and more being put in than any other state in the union every year. That's what we're facing. And it's purposeful. And the Muslim Brotherhood and those that are organized and care, who, by the way, has leadership that are unindicted co-conspirator from the Holy Land Foundation, this vast array and web of network that is organized, they are trying to Islamify Texas because they know if they take Texas, they take America, and they can get a foothold and take the West. And it's purposeful, and it's frankly something that is the number one issue we face as Americans, and it's not even close.
Well, I got to say, I'm glad you blew the whistle on this because I think I follow the news pretty in depth. And yet I'm watching your press conference yesterday, and I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I mean, I was stationed down in Fort Worth. I went in and out. I mean, it literally flies below the radar, and your efforts to expose it are huge, because I think you might be the only person that I know bringing this to the national front.
Well, the good news is we had 17 House members there yesterday. We had Tommy Tuberville, Senator running for governor in Alabama. Keith Self, my colleague, he represents Plano, Collin County, north of Dallas. He and I co-founded the Sharia Free America Caucus. And we had, a bunch of our colleagues who were there. Brandon Gill, a fellow Texan, he represents, in and around Fort Worth and that side of the DFW Metroplex, Denton, and that way. Brandon's a great guy, and he was out there, and he was making the very clear point that we imported all of this. It is our immigration policies that are driving this, and we need to stop it. That's why we need to review H-1Bs. That's why we need to pause immigration. I introduced legislation to pause immigration until we can resettle and figure out who we are as a country and protect our sovereignty and remove people who need to be removed. So we're going to keep our foot on the gas. We need to do it.
All right. The last thing I want to ask you, you're running for attorney general. So obviously, whether you were running for re-election or not, I'd still probably ask you the same question. This race in Tarrant County worries me. It was a big swing. I get it. I said this the other day. I get the weather was a factor. I get that there was a brutal primary on our side. I get all that. But the turnout concerns me. The swing in vote turnout here. And obviously, as somebody who's got their finger on the pulse of Texas right now, I'm going to ask you point blank, does that race in that Texas State Senate concern you?
Well, the answer is yes and no. You're right. I'm running for attorney general. I'm covering the state. Look, there's a lot of folks who are animated and excited about what President Trump is doing. But to the point of our first conversation in this podcast, we need to stand up and fight to energize people to want to show up to the polls. I think that the answer here is somewhere in between. I think we had a little bit of apathy and we need more energy. The truth is, it was a Saturday election, early February, 2 weeks before the primary, after a primary, as you noted, that we'd had in November, where Republicans did beat the Democrats. We had 2 Republicans. The total of their votes was higher than the Democrat for that seat. But now this was a runoff because you got to get over 50. So we had a low turnout. So that's on us. That's on the, not us, I'm not up there, but that's on the Republicans there and the Republican Party to get turnout up. It's a wake-up call that if you want Texas to stay strong, you got to energize them and you got to show up. So now we've got to make sure we do that between now and November.
All right. Well, between now and November, I hope that you continue to shine a light on what's going on the SAVE Act. I appreciate all of your efforts to make and strengthen our election integrity, and keep fighting there, Congressman.
Thanks, Sean. God bless. Appreciate it.
We appreciate it. Thank you. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.